First Things, episode number 14.
I seem to be lost.
And so you're working around the clock so you don't take time for yourself to feel like an actual human being.
I used to feel like no matter how hard I worked, I was just spinning my wheels.
Trying to be perfect, we try to have everything in place at one point in time, and you can't.
Well, hello everyone. Welcome back to First Things, the podcast dedicated to practical productivity based on modern research. My name is Brandon Vaughn, and it's my goal to help you apply productive solutions to your life to help you live with less stress, greater passion, and amazing results. So today we are talking about being a better listener. So all of you guys who have girlfriends or wives, you will definitely benefit from this, but I think everyone can benefit from this. We all have so much that we can grow in the area of being better listeners. For all we could say about being a good communicator, your ability to listen, not just hear, is a foundational area that we all need help in. So this is what today's episode is about. When people speak, do you really listen? I mean, really listen. How much of what's communicated to you do you really internalize? You know, recently I was talking to someone, and I could tell when I was talking to them that they were not very present in the conversation. Even though this person would nod and say, yeah, the whole time we communicated, her follow-up comments would reveal she wasn't really listening 100% to me. For example, there's a point when I was talking about A, we'll call what I was talking about A, but she kept replying to me as if I was talking about B. Complete mismatch there. I thought it was really strange, so I started repeating what I said earlier in a slower, more precise manner, but the same thing happened. While she would nod and say, yeah, while I was speaking, her reply suggested that she did not get the gist of what I was trying to say. At that point, I was entirely baffled. After engaging in a few more conversations with her, though, I realized it was a norm for her. She often nodded and looked like she was following the conversation, but her comments were often off tangent. It would seem that even though she exhibited signs that she was listening, she was never really listening. She was hearing me, but she wasn't listening to me. Now, listening is a very important skill, more so than we may even realize it. I mean, we use it all of the time. We use it at work with our managers, our coworkers. We use it in presentations. We use it in relationships, in social settings, with our families. Even, believe it or not, we use it when we're watching TV and films. We're constantly hearing things, but we don't always listen to what's going on around us. Now, here's a very key principle that I've discovered. I found that I learn a lot more when I keep my ears open and my mouth shut, rather than the other way around. There's an old proverb that says, even a fool will be mistaken for a wise man if he just keeps his mouth shut. Now, some people seem to be very blessed with a gift of being a good listeners. I don't know if you've met some of these people. I have. That you're around them and they make you feel so incredibly good. They can tell you some of the worst information and it makes you feel like $1 million. And a lot of that is because they are such great listeners. You feel calmer when you're with them and you feel like they've actually listened to you. It wasn't a struggle to get a word in the conversation. They didn't always interrupt you. They had a very soothing nature to them. And the truth is, that's a minority nowadays in a very noisy world. Now, given our different temperaments, I think it's unrealistic to think that we can all aspire to be that type of person, but we can all benefit from improving in this area and becoming a better listener no matter how much we do on that particular scale. Now, you should start by doing a little soul searching to come to terms with how you truly listening. Listening is a learnable skill if you truly commit to making it an imperative in your life. Listening is one of the most important skills you could dedicate your time and energy toward. Also, how well you listen has a major impact on your job effectiveness, on your productivity, on the quality of your relationships with others. I mean, we listen to obtain information. We listen to understand. We listen for enjoyment. We listen to learn. Right now, you are listening to me speak. Now, given all of this listening we do, you would think we would be so good at it, but we're not. And I think that's a very important principle that we should understand in all of life. You cannot assume that you are good at something just because you have been exposed to it a lot. And this is definitely true for listening. In fact, a very sad statistic. Most of us are not good listeners according to research. Research suggests that we remember between 25% and 50% of what we hear. That means that when you talk to your boss or your colleagues or customers or your spouse for 10 minutes, they pay attention to less than half of that conversation. So if you talk to them for 10 minutes, you're going to be fortunate if they even remember what you said for 5 minutes. That is terrible. That's very dismal. And turn it around, and it reveals that when you are receiving directions or you're being presented with information, you aren't hearing the whole message either. You hope the important parts are captured in your 25 to 50%, but what if they're not? Clearly, listening is a skill that we can all benefit from and improve upon. If you become a better listener, you will improve your productivity, as well as your ability to influence and negotiate and persuade others. What's more, you will often avoid conflict and misunderstandings, which often have their root cause in the fact that we aren't listening to other people. Now, there are a lot of hindrances to really listening to people, but perhaps one of our biggest weaknesses is impatience. Many of us feel rushed and stressed, and we may want to cut people right to the chase. You may feel like you know what they're going to say anyway, so you interrupt them. And research has shown that many people, especially managers, are 18-second listeners. That's how long they will listen before interrupting. You should try this on yourself. Take out a timer and actually time how long you will typically listen to someone before you interrupt them. And you might find that it's very typical of other people that around 18 seconds is about how long you listen before you actually have to say something. No one can really teach us how to change this, including me. We have to consciously make the decision to stop these habits that are damaging to us and to others as well. I don't know about you, but have you ever noticed that you maybe know what somebody's trying to say to you and you just go ahead and interrupt them and they aren't very happy with you? Or they keep on talking as if you never said anything. They didn't even hear the solution that you're providing them. And it was only after they had gotten it all out that it seems like they flip a switch in their brains and they actually start listening to what you say. See, part of listening is not hearing, but it's to understand that people have a deep need for connection and being understood. You aren't truly listening to someone nor valuing them by interrupting them. And many times people have to get it all out before they can switch that thing in their brain to actually start listening to someone. And you're actually just wasting your time trying to give them solutions or talk to them if they still haven't gotten all of that out. There's a very interesting resource called Power Listening, Mastering the Most Critical Business Skill of All by Bernard Ferrari. And he actually identifies 6 types of poor listeners. The first one is called the opinionator. This is a person that squelches ideas that don't match their own. They listen only to reload their rebuttal to others' input. They're so highly opinionated, and their opinion is really the only one that matters. Then there's the grouch. And this is a person that everyone else's ideas are just wrong, and they just seem grumpy all the time. They don't want to listen to anything. They're just grouchy. Then there's the preambler. And this is the one that loves to have these windy lead-ins. They talk a lot and they go on and on and on before ever getting to the point. Very self-serving. To them, questions are simply stealth speeches, and they love giving speeches, and they go on and on. Then there is someone that they call a perseverer, that they just talk a lot but doesn't really say anything. They don't advance the conversation. They just persevere. They're just there taking up space, but it goes nowhere. It's very empty. Then there is the answer man or the answer woman, and they spout out solutions before there even is a consensus of what the problem is. They desperately are eager to impress people, and they always feel like they've got to give a solution. They've got to give an answer. And then the last one mentioned in this book is the pretender. These are the people that just really aren't interested in what you have to say, and they will pretend to be engaged. Many of them have already made up their own mind or they just couldn't care less. So think about this. Do you fall in a trap of one of these 6 types of poor listeners? Be honest with yourself and recognize if you sometimes unwittingly fall into one of these categories. Well, that's very helpful because a key catalyst of change is in understanding where we are currently so that we can change. Another very interesting thing is that we can often make assumptions when we listen, and we can do this in a very sincere manner. And if we do this, it can greatly hinder our ability to fully understand what is said. So I want to read a story to you, and this isn't original to me, so I will post up the link for you to take this test as well. But I want to read this to you, and I want to ask you a series of questions. So I'm going to tell you a story really quick. So I want you to listen to me, and then I want to ask you some questions off of this. So a businessman had just turned off the lights in the store when a man appeared and demanded money. The owner opened a cash register. The contents of the cash register were scooped up, and the man sped away. A member of the police force was notified immediately. So let me ask you some true-false questions off of this. So the first question, true or false? A man appeared after the owner had turned off his store lights. Number 2, the robber was a man. Number 3, the man who appeared did not demand money. Number 4, the man who opened the cash register was the owner. Number 5, the store owner scooped up the contents of the cash register and ran away. Number 6, someone opened the cash register. Number 7, after the man who demanded the money scooped up the contents of the cash register, he ran away. Number 8, while the cash register contained money, the story does not state how much. Number 9, the robber demanded money of the owner. Number 10, the story concerns a series of events in which only 3 persons are referred to: the owner of the store, a man who demanded money, and a member of the police force. Number 11, the following events in the story are true. Someone demanded money, a cash register was opened, its contents were scooped up, and a man dashed out of the store. Now, the story and its statements, or the questions that we asked, were purposely ambiguous. There were gaps in what you were told and asked. You probably found yourself filling in the gaps or even making assumptions. For example, you may have assumed the businessman was the owner. Let me read the story again to you. A businessman had just turned off the lights in a store when a man appeared and demanded money. The owner opened a cash register. The contents of the cash register were scooped up, and the man sped away. A member of the police force was notified immediately. And I didn't tell you the answers to the questions. You'll need to go to the link in the website to actually test yourself and see whether you got these right. But one of the questions asked was that the businessman was the owner, and it doesn't say that in the story. If you said true to that, you assumed that the businessman was the owner. Also, did you assume that the man who demanded money was the robber? It doesn't say that in the story. He could have just wanted a refund. We can hear these things so many times and make assumptions about what we think is true, and this can be a very, very damaging thing in trying to listen to other people, is that we start inserting our own assumptions about things, and that is never what they said. And something to consider is, what if this had been a courtroom and you were testifying to the accuracy of your quiz answers based on what you heard in the story? I wonder how we would have done. We need to train ourselves to listen attentively and not rush to fill in the gaps with our own interpretation. We need to get in the habit of pausing and asking ourselves, is my interpretation an objective evaluation of what I heard, or am I just making up my own version of what I've heard? And on many occasions, listening signals intellectual humility. It means acknowledging to others and ourselves that we don't have all of the answers, that others have as much of an opportunity to be right as we do. It's being comfortable with being wrong. Above all, it's approaching conversations with what I call a beginner's mind. We're open to learning from others. We're deciding to temporarily abandon our need to sound authoritative and right. We're staying wide open to the possibilities of what we hear. Doing this takes us away from an ego-driven state to an enlightened state. It frees our mind to be fully present, and it silences the background noise of our heads that we are often predisposed to listen to. And thus we become more predisposed to listen attentively to the person that's in front of us. To enhance your listening skills, you need to let other people know that you're listening to what he or she is saying. To understand the importance of this, ask yourself if you've ever been engaged in a conversation where you wondered if the other person was listening to what you were saying. I don't think a week goes by, maybe almost never a day goes by, that I'm not experiencing this in some fashion. You wonder if your message is getting across or if it's even worthwhile continuing to speak. I can tell you there's been numerous people that I have been conversing with, and I just quit talking about what I was talking about, and the person never asked me to continue, never asked me any questions. It was obvious they weren't even listening to me to begin with. It feels like talking to a brick wall, and it's something that you want to avoid. You want to avoid doing that to other people. I guarantee you that if you can make your listening skills better, people are going to notice you. You will stand out in a crowd because simply people don't listen. And acknowledgement can be something just as simple as nodding your head or a simple uh-huh. You aren't necessarily agreeing with that person. You're simply indicating that you're listening. Using body language, other signs to acknowledge that you're listening also reminds you to pay attention and to not let your mind wander. You should also try to respond to the speaker in a way that will encourage them to continue speaking to you. And something as simple as nodding or saying uh-huh or yeah says you're interested. Well, that's great. You should do stuff like that, but you should make sure you really are listening and not doing like what I said in the beginning of this episode of just saying this and not actually listening to someone. So I think there are other things that you can do besides just doing that will help you be a better listener. And this is what we want to get into now. 7 action steps that you can start doing today to be a better listener. Now, many of these, I'll be honest with you, there are some things that we talk about on these episodes where I sit and cringe and I think, gosh, I just don't want to tell people to do this because it seems so obvious. And I think we need to hear this. You need to hear this. You may hear some things you've never heard before, but many of these things you'll be like, yeah, of course, that makes sense. And oh, yeah, I've heard that before. Yes, I know this. And that's great, but you need to put it into practice. So number 1, and probably my most favorite one of all, is you need to choose to be present. Choose to be present. Are you really present when you are around other people, or are you lost in your own thoughts? In the example I shared in the opening, it was apparent that my friend was not present during the conversations. Even though she would nod as a sign of acknowledgement while others were speaking, her mind was lost in her own thoughts. Thus, when it was her turn to speak, her comments would often be off tangent to what was being communicated. To be a good listener, you have to be present. Being present means, first of all, not being preoccupied physically, and secondly, not being preoccupied mentally. Now, the first thing means to remove all distractions. We'll talk about that in a minute. The latter requires you to clear your mind of other thoughts and focus on the person speaking. There's something magical, almost mystical in your head when you can refocus and you can feel that shift going on inside where you put your attention from this onto the person in front of you. This means that you may have to stop thinking about the argument that you had at work with your coworker this morning, or the report that you haven't finished, or where you're going to go for dinner, and to pay attention to what's being communicated in the now. Now, I can relate to this with my daughter. My daughter will come to me many times while I'm working on something, and she starts talking to me. And while I find those moments completely amazing and precious, there are many times when I'm not focused on her, and she will be talking to me. There have been times when she has given up talking to me, and she's left because she knows that I'm not listening. She can see those clues. And there are other times when, fortunately, I'm able to catch that. And I could tell that she's been talking to me for several minutes, and I'm not focused on her. I'm not present to her. And there's something, I don't know how to describe it, but there's something that goes on in my head or in my whole being where I shift my focus, and I'm present with her. I am there with her. I've refocused my attention. I've refocused every bit of energy into me to her, and now I am focused on her. I am one with her, and I'm present with her. There is a conscious choice that happens. It doesn't just automatically happen because I'm there. There's a conscious choice to be focused, a conscious choice to be present. Number 2, remember that your heart is bigger than your ears. Being good at listening requires heart. It requires a genuine desire to connect with a person as one human being to another. We cannot escape this. And so many times when I hear people talk about listening, I think they miss this element. If you don't have respect for the person in front of you, if you don't value this person, if you can't love them in some way or care for them in some way by listening to them, you will not be present to them, and you will struggle with this. So one of the big keys of listening is to value people, and that means to value everyone or potentially everyone. It's about building a relationship, and there is no more powerful way to do this than when a genuine effort to truly hear what people are saying, to intuitively understand where they're coming from and what they're leaving unsaid. When this happens, it creates a strong bond, a strong friendship, a strong love that people love about you, that they trust. There's a loyalty that builds. There's no doubt that listening moves us closer to each other. Now, one way to do this is to consider your goal for each relationship. For example, your goal for one of your team members may be to boost their confidence so that they can take on greater responsibilities. When you listen with intention, you have an opportunity to uncover their anxieties. It's only by understanding where these people are coming from that you can meaningfully help a person in their progress. But you have to value this. If it's your boss, then what's the relationship you want with your boss? If it's a spouse, if it's a child, if it's a parent, if it's a friend, you have to ask yourself, what is the goal I want in this relationship? And then see where listening filters into that, where listening becomes a part of that or a foundation of that. Remember that it's the person that matters. So don't let quirky behaviors of people distract you either. There's people that just have annoying mannerisms, or they don't have the best English, or they have a lot of pride to them. And you have to get past this and see the person. I've said this many times, but I really believe that everyone is my teacher. And if I approach life from that perspective, it makes life this great adventure, because then when I come across people that annoy me or people that I have a hard time listening to, I start looking for gold nuggets. I start looking for the treasure in what they're saying because I know it's there somewhere. They may annoy me, and after I listen to them, they may still annoy me, but there's a golden nugget there. There's some treasure that I can take out of there. And even if it's that the person shows me what I don't want to do, that is still a valuable lesson that they can teach me. If everyone is my teacher, then I can learn from someone, even if most or all of what they say is wrong. I see myself as a treasure seeker, not as an error hunter. I'm not looking for error. I'm not looking for where people are wrong. I'm not looking for how I can show them the way and make them right. I'm looking for the treasure on the journey of my life, and I do that by listening to what people say. Number 3, involve your body. This is such a huge secret. You will find that I'm constantly referring to this in many of my episodes. The best way to focus an unfocused mind is to involve your body in some way. We have such a bad tendency to want to keep everything internal and make it an entirely mental thing. And if you will make it physical, if you will involve your body in some capacity, it will help out tremendously. And you say, okay, well, I'm already using my ears if I'm listening, so I'm using my body. And that's not what I mean by that. I'm saying to use other things other than your ears. So use your mouth and use your voice and use your hands and use your face. Use your body to communicate and to listen. Let it help you listen. So, for example, take notes or play games with what is being said, like reword what they're saying or pick out the longest word they use. Use active listening, paraphrase, summarizing, verbal, nonverbal encouragements, asking questions. These are just a few things, and we'll dig into these in just a minute. If you're finding it particularly difficult to concentrate on what someone is saying, well, then try repeating their words mentally as they say them. This will reinforce that message, help you stay focused. Use your eyes. Look at the speaker. Look at them in the eyes. There's nothing that signals that I'm not paying attention quicker than staring over someone's head or looking down in your lap where your phone is and you're surfing the internet instead of listening to them, or you're checking your email, or you're on your laptop or something. Making eye contact is the best way to give respect and attention to someone. Look at the speaker directly. Now, some people feel uncomfortable making too much eye contact. This may be something you have to work on. And again, baby steps. Don't feel like you have to conquer the world in one day. But if you have a problem with looking people in the eye, well, just make it a point to do it with one person in one conversation this next week. Even something like looking somewhere near their eyes, like between the eyes or at their nose, is a good way to start training yourself to make eye contact. Even something simple like that can help out quite a bit. And many people, if you're looking at their nose or in between their eyes, will feel like you're looking at them in their eyes many times. So you get a benefit of that, even if you're a little bit nervous to do that. Show that you're listening by nodding your head. See, again, something physical. Smile. Even say small words like yes or right is going to show them that you're engaged, that you're listening, and that you wish for them to continue. Smiling can have such a tremendous impact upon other people. Nodding can have a big impact. And they're all physical things. They're all involving your body. Speaking of which, note what your posture is and make sure that it's open and inviting. If you can, try not to cross your arms in front of people. Sometimes that can be a little bit closed-ended. If you're slouching too much, if you're pointing in a different direction, many times when I listen to people, I try to lean in and to bend over and like I'm reaching toward them. I'll have a distance between us, but I'll be leaning in like I'm just waiting for the next word to come out of their mouth. I'm trying to really focus and get my body involved in that. Now, something else that's very interesting is you can listen to their body language as well. A good deal of communication happens through body, position, and movement. So pay attention to the signals that the person is giving you as well. So what are they doing? What are they doing with their arms? What are they doing with their face? Are they looking at you as well? Are they leaning back? Are they sitting forward? Are they making eye contact? All of these body language that they are giving can also be a very tremendous thing in listening to a person. Because we all know this, we don't just talk with words. I don't know about you, but when I talk, even like right now, my hands are all up in the air. I look like I'm swatting flies or something right now because I've got to involve my hands. My body is part of my whole being. And in my words, my body's got to get involved in it. And guess what? You listen with your body as well. So if you get your body involved in listening, you'll be surprised how much this helps you accomplish better listening. Number 4, the problem with listening, your listening, may be right under your nose. That is, your mouth. Sometimes our mouths can make us worse listeners. What we say and how we respond can enhance or it can thwart listening and communication. So when you do say something, when you're listening, when you say something, try to use encouraging words that invites them to continue. Oh, tell me more, or let's talk about it, or do you want to talk about it? And they may say no, but then you say, okay, well, I'm here if you want to. When someone mentions a secret, their own or someone else's, and seems nervous, well, assure them that they don't need to tell you. Summarize and paraphrase what they're saying. One of the best ways to signal that you're listening is to periodically repeat what they've told you, starting sentences with something like, well, it sounds like what you're saying is this, or what I'm hearing is this. Will encourage that person, and it will prove that you've listened to what they've said. It also gives them an opportunity to clarify anything that you've misunderstood, or they can also transition what they're saying into your response. Ask them questions also. Another great way to listen actively is to ask them open and leading questions, or ask for clarification about something you're confused about. If you're asking questions, it means that you're interested in their responses, making them feel comfortable, making them feel listened to. When you do this, try and ask questions that elicit more complicated answers. So if you're talking to someone about college, instead of saying, what did you major in, it might be more interesting to say, what was college like for you? Because one question is a very simple answer. Oh, I measured in economics. But what was college like for you invites a conversation. And ultimately, this is what we want. But there's definitely things that we want to avoid. And the chief one among them is we want to avoid interrupting a person before they've had a chance to say what they want to say. I find that oftentimes when I just sit and wait, the person will often have something to add on, which I would have never have known if I'd interjected or stepped in to speak. Now, once you get a hang of what people have to say, where the person is coming from, I'll be more open in interjecting. I'll be more open to say something then, while being conscious of that person's need. Again, I'm watching their body language as well, letting them go ahead if there's something that they want to say. It's good etiquette to not interrupt a person, especially mid-sentence. Let them finish what they have to say before you butt in with your comments. I know there are times you feel you get what the person is trying to say and you can't wait to share your comments, but listen and hold it off in the beginning of the conversation, because the person may have other things to share, but they can't because you are speaking. So simply just stop talking for a little bit. Quiet that voice in your mind. Try not to open up your mouth as much during the conversation. Try to listen to your voice within and focus on what is being said. Try to have conversations by saying very little, keeping the other person talking. And again, you can interject questions. You can paraphrase as you go through this conversation. But other than that, try to remain in a state of listening. Focus on the conversation, nothing else. Be genuinely interested in the conversation, and in doing so, look and act involved. Don't do anything else. One thing you might try to do sometimes is to reverse the conversation and imagine the other person's experience. Imagine yourself in the other person's shoes, their stance, their positions, their impressions. What are the other person's values? What are their points of view? If they're younger, imagine yourself with that experience. Does it change your perception any? How do you think the other person perceived you and your contributions to the conversation? And as much as you can, speak only positively when you're engaged in the conversation. This isn't always possible, but you should strive for this. Strive to be affirmative. Resist the urge to jump in with any critical or disparaging comments. Use constructive replies when you can, positive words, uplifting words to people. And then afterwards, assess how you felt about the conversation and how the other person felt. How can you give constructive criticism in a positive way in the future? One thing that I love doing in this is to watch other people. So many times I will go to a cafeteria or to a coffee shop and I will just sit and relax and I will watch other people talk to each other. And it's fascinating. It's fascinating to watch how people listen and mostly how they don't listen, and to watch these body languages. It's very interesting to see one person who's obvious that the other person isn't paying attention to them, and then also to see two people that are just talking to each other, but they're not listening to each other. They're just carrying on two different conversations, and they acknowledge each other with words like, okay, right, but they're carrying on two completely different conversations. And you can learn from that. You can watch this and observe and think, okay, what would I have done in this situation? What could I have done to actually listen into this situation? It's a great way to experiment with these types of things without actually involving people that you know. So I would encourage you, sit in a busy place and observe what's going on around you, and then see if you can try to guess what other people are thinking and feeling without hearing them. Sometimes I will intentionally try to spend a full day without interrupting. I will make a point of it. Today is a day I'm not going to interrupt people. I'm going to resist the urge to jump in. I'm just going to sit and listen, even if it's past my normal tolerance level. And boy, I tell you, I can really push myself sometimes, and I'm just busting. I've just got to say something, and I can be quite quiet, but there's times I want to jump in. There are some topics like in business that I have such a hard time not chiming in. There's a metric out there called Net Promoter Score, NPS, and I do not like it at all. I think it's the worst metric I've ever seen in all my years in statistics and psychometrics. I think it is terrible. And if people start talking about, let's make people promoters and all this, I just want to scream. And it's so hard for me to sit there on those days, because it always happens that people will say that on the day that I have decided I'm going to spend fully listening to people and not interrupting them. And boy, it's very hard. But I still strive toward this, and I think it's a great goal. You should try that. and then engage yourself and ask myself, how did I do? Again, don't beat up on yourself. We talked about this so many times. Learn from your mistakes, value your mistakes, and then grow from it and treat your life as an adventure. So besides interrupting people, also don't interrogate people. Don't try to think of your response in your head while you're listening. Don't change the subject, and don't offer to tell how your day was. So many times we're so interested, you must hear about my day. Well, just listen to somebody else's day, and don't even chime in about your day until they ask you. Try that someday. I love word origins, and the word origin for tact, T-A-C-T, when we have tact from one another, the Latin root of that actually means to touch, which is helpful to keep in mind when you respond to someone. A conversation is a kind of intimacy. Someone has trusted you enough to tell you something and is willing often to hear out your response. So be kind. Touch them in some way by listening to them. Avoid phrases like, "Are you sure?" or "It's not that bad." Cliche phrases that people don't want to hear. Sleep on it. You'll feel better tomorrow. Don't be so judgmental. Do your best. I can't help you with that. Saying it's your choice, decision is okay. And in general, spare the advice. Unsolicited advice is rarely appreciated. It is the equivalent of showing up at someone's house unannounced. Think about that. How many of us love people to show up at our house unannounced? And that is often what unsolicited advice is like. Next time you started giving someone advice, think about someone showing up at your house before you're ready to go to bed and you have to answer the door. We also give advice in the form of stories. No one is really interested in our war stories. I hate to say this, and I love telling my own stories, and I have to realize that many times people aren't interested in my war stories. And this is a very well-meaning behavior, very well-meaning response to say, "Oh, yeah, I can see why you think you have it rough, but man, let me tell you about one of my days," as if I'm going to up your ante and show you how it's really bad. And I think many times we're well-meaning by that, but it totally disrupts the listening process because it gets us to switch from hearing the person out to forcing them to hear what we have to say. Most people are usually under an obligation to politely sit and listen to advice. So stifle your need to dispense advice. Make space for people to speak. Let silence do its part, and you might find that they're more likely to share from their heart. We never know what we may miss when we rush to fill the air with our words. Our personal filters, our assumptions, our judgments, our beliefs can distort what we hear. As a listener, your role is to understand what is being said. This may require you to reflect what is being said and ask questions. If you find yourself responding emotionally to what someone says, well, then say so, and then ask for more information. Say, "I may not be understanding you correctly, and I find myself taking what you said personally. What I thought you said just now is this. Is that what you meant?" Treat the person in a way that you think that they would want to be treated. Treat them in a way that you would want to be treated. Understanding is not the same thing as agreeing. You don't have to agree with the person. Just listen and try to understand. People are usually more receptive to working things out and compromising when they feel understood. So paraphrasing what they said, we mentioned this already, is a great thing to do. "What I'm hearing you saying is this," or "It sounds like you're saying this." It's a great way to reflect back. It gives tremendous respect to the person that you're listening to. Asking them to clarify certain points. "What did you mean when you said this? Is this what you mean?" Summarizing those speakers' comments periodically. Number 5, avoid distractions. Now again, this is one of those common sense things, but I find myself doing goofy things here all the time, avoiding distractions. Now, whether it's a side conversation that you're noticing or it's your phone going off, splitting your attention between the speaker and something else will always signal that you're uninterested. Too often, instead of listening, we like to wait our turn to speak. Anticipating what the other person is going to say or preparing a rebuttal before they've even finished speaking means that you're not actually having a conversation. You're waiting for your turn. Wait to formulate a response until it's appropriate to make one. We've spent a whole episode talking about multitasking and how often we don't do a very good job at this. But when you're trying to multitask and you're on your phone and it seems very efficient and harmless, that person notices those things. And it's very distracting. It's very disrespectful to that other person. And we have to be honest, in our day and age, we don't have boundaries for these things. We don't understand limitations for this, whether it's web browsing, checking emails, replying to emails, working, talking on the phones, fiddling with our phones, writing in our notebooks. We just don't know when to stop. So when people approach us to talk, it's natural that we add on to the list of things we're doing at the moment. We say, oh, I'm going to listen to you and keep doing all this other stuff, and realize that we cannot do this. And even if we could, okay, so let's imagine you are somehow magically able to write your presentation, check your emails, and surf the web while you're listening to someone talk to you. It's disrespectful to them. Even if you can do that, it just doesn't look good. And it's not nice to them, and it's not respectful. It's not caring to that other person. And like I said earlier, if you believe with me that every person is your teacher, then you should give them the dignity to absorb every lesson that they are presenting to you at that moment. And I'll be honest with you, I do this, and I constantly am tweaking myself to get away from this and realize that I have to put boundaries around these types of things. Even if it's just a short or casual conversation, if the person is trying to tell you something important or share something personal, you should ideally stop what you are doing and give them full attention. It's what I said in the very first point, that you consciously choose to be present to that person. So what I've had to learn to do, and it sounds so crazy, I've had to learn to do this, to close the lid on my laptop and eliminate all distractions. I was in a meeting last week, and I was sitting there, and I had my laptop open. And I realized while I was sitting there that I was doing all sorts of things, and I was not listening to the meeting. So what did I do? I closed the lid. That's all I had to do. Close the lid, and I enabled myself to better be present in that moment. I turned myself toward the people that were speaking. I gave them my full focus. And doing that was a huge sign of respect to them. And I will tell you that I actually had people engage with me in that whole meeting. And I could tell it was because I had switched myself and I had chose to consciously focus and listen to what was going on. Number 6, don't assume anything. An important part of listening is to not assume. When you assume, you automatically layer over what the person says with your presumptions, which makes it nearly impossible to have any meaningful conversation. While that person may be talking about subject A, ultimately you can only hear subject B simply because your mind is not open to receiving new information in the first place. When it comes to communication, err on the side of safety and assume you know nothing. In fact, many times that's what I will do. I will put myself in a position and I will start throwing out what I think I know and say, okay, in this situation, I'm going to pretend. I'm going to make a game of it. I'm going to pretend I do not know what this person is talking about. And now I'm going to listen to what they have to say. And then after they finish talking, I will suddenly remember. I'm pretending it now. I'm making a game of this. Then I will remember all the stuff I know about this. And then I can filter in what they've said, incorporate it. I can respond to that person at that point, but I make a game of it. And we've already said this, so I don't want to repeat myself, but many times asking people questions, paraphrasing what they say is a great way to make sure you aren't assuming anything because you're asking them, oh, so what you're saying is that whatever, right? And then they could say yes or no, or they could clarify what they're saying. That's a great tool that we should utilize, and it will help assure that we aren't assuming something or that we haven't locked ourselves into some paradigm that we're not truly listening to the other person. And finally, number 7, what are some tips with dealing with conflict? Well, again, we have a whole podcast episode of dealing with conflict. What are you supposed to do, though, in listening when someone is growling at you, screaming at you, making it sound like you are the worst person who ever lived? Well, we have to understand, especially if this is somebody that we care about in some fashion, whether it is a boss to a spouse, and there are varying degrees of caring in that situation, but we do care. We have to realize that when people are angry, they usually want to be heard and understood. What they don't want in return is criticism or patronizing comments or denying of their feelings or attacking their position or personality. And this can be very hard because if someone is spouting off at you, they're trying to be understood, and it can very much feel like an attack on you, and you in turn start doing the same thing. It takes a lot of work. It takes a lot of mental energy to sit there and be secure in who you are and realize that they may be having a bad day or they're just needing to be heard and understood. And it could even be pointed towards you and sound like criticism for you. But to be able to sit there and to be a sponge and to absorb what they're saying but not make it your identity is a huge thing to do in life. Again, you can ask very thoughtful questions, which is a great way to disarm the anger. It's another source is empathy, because it shows that you're truly trying to walk in their shoes and understand what they're trying to say, how they feel. But to be quite honest, the road gets really bumpy when the other person has something critical to say about you. After all, no one wants to hear complaints or bad news, especially when it's about them. And if it happens often, probably because we're not very well practiced in the art of listening, it can be interpreted as nagging. Despite how uncomfortable it may make you feel, it's smart to listen to the bad news anyway. Whenever you're confronted with the situation, just tell yourself that complaints and criticism are gifts. And I know I say a lot of stuff that's hard to swallow sometimes. It's hard to really take in. And this is one of those areas that I've made a lot of progress in, but there's still a lot of growth for me to really understand complaints and criticism as gifts. Now think about this. If this is your boss and they're dumping on you, they're criticizing you, if this is a spouse and they're dumping on you and criticizing you, that person is in their complaint actually sticking with you, and they're alerting you of a potential problem. Effectively, they are giving an opportunity to rectify the problem. If they weren't, they wouldn't talk to you. They would just fire you. They would just leave you. So the fact that they are trying to involve you and they want you to listen to them is in itself a gift if you can just see that. And there's another very interesting way of looking at this, especially with maybe a spouse or a relationship that many of us may not have thought about before. And that is that complaints are often based on compliments, or the reason behind the complaint is a compliment. So, for example, if your partner complains that you're not spending enough time with them, well, the hidden compliment is that they want to spend more time with you. So that's a great thing to deal with. So in summary, let me give you what I call is the listener's manifesto. A good listener is attentive. They make good eye contact. They don't interrupt what the other person is saying, and they show an interest in what is being communicated. There's always something incredible you can hear in anyone's story. A good listener does not look over their shoulder of the person that's speaking or waiting for someone more interesting to come along. A good listener does not check their phone or their tablet in the middle of a conversation when someone is sharing with them. A good listener is not waiting for their chance to get a word in, treating the period of listening as a pause in their monologue. Being so focused on trying to get one's view over is insensitive and misses the real value in the conversation. A good listener uses positive body language, leaning forward and showing an enthusiastic, relaxed nature. They don't fidget, they don't cross their arms, they don't look elsewhere or express inappropriate shock or disbelief at what's being shared. A good listener does not hurry somebody, but ask good questions to guide the sharing. They guide and help shape what's being shared. And if the other person feels cut off or squashed, then they failed. A good listener does not approach a conversation with prejudice, expecting to know what's going to come out of the speaker's lips. They don't listen with a preformed opinion, but attempt to have an open mind to what's being communicated. It's amazing how much time is wasted with a belief that people understand what someone means without taking the effort and time to listen. A good listener cares. They show empathy for what the other person has to say. It's genuine, authentic, and comes from a place of truthful concern. A good listener identifies areas of agreement with the speaker while avoiding the cliche statement, "I know exactly how you feel," because you don't. It ends up sounding insensitive, it's trite, it's self-centered. Everyone loves to be truly understood. No one likes to be patronized. And the fact is, every single one of us is unique. I've said this many times. If two of us are exactly alike, one of us isn't necessary. So you don't know exactly how someone feels. You don't understand what they're going through, but you can listen and you can be a friend. A good listener remembers. They remember and follow up conversations whenever possible. They treat what is shared with respect and, where appropriate, ongoing interaction. And lastly, a good listener knows how to treat what is shared with confidentiality. They are trustworthy and sensitive with information and never look to use anything that is shared for any purpose other than the good of the person that spoke it. Well, that wraps up this episode on becoming a better listener. I hope some of the tips that we've talked about today will help you out. I know they've helped me out a tremendous amount, and many of these things I've been putting into my practice and see great, tremendous goals. Still got a long ways to go to be a great listener, but I'm on that journey, and it's exciting to be on that journey. As always, please consider leaving me a rating and comment on iTunes. It would be a tremendous help if you would leave me a comment. It would be a tremendous help if you can rate me as well. I have about 27, 28 ratings up there right now, and I would love to see a lot more. I would love to see hundreds of ratings. So if you listen to me on a regular basis, please consider leaving me a rating, leaving me a comment. It would just be a tremendous benefit for this show. Also, remember, I do have voicemail options up on my website at firstThingsProductivity.com. We'd love for you to leave me voicemail feedback. Leave me questions. I'm happy to play them here. Happy to answer your questions on productivity and about first things in life. If you have any comments on this episode, I have a discussion area set up at firstThingsProductivity.com/14. So until next time, remember this. We show the ultimate respect and love to people when we listen to them. Not just hear them, but listen to them. Most people do not listen with the intent to understand. They listen with the intent to reply. Too often we underestimate the power of a touch, a smile, a kind word, a listening ear, an honest compliment, or the smallest act of caring, all of which have the potential to turn a life around. They have the potential to change our world. So embrace today with passion and intention, and don't die with your music still inside you.